Hello, everyone. This is Sofia Smallstorm doing another podcast. And today I'm going to be having a discussion with Larry Gust. I met Larry a couple of weeks ago at the home of a doctor who specializes in environmental medicine. And Larry is very well qualified in this field of building biology and building remediation. You know, I've talked on shows a lot about how we must protect ourselves from wireless radiation, the microwave frequencies that are all over the place. It's one thing to not use your cell phone unless you have to, but it's another thing to be irradiated by what is bouncing around from cell towers and antennas perched on all the buildings in all the downtowns. And Larry also specializes in chemicals, molds. Honestly, if you have issues, he is someone whose website you might want to look at, Gust Enviro. I will link it. But I was very impressed with Larry. He's a very dignified, very experienced, very kind person. And we're going to hear from him himself now.
Well, good morning, Sophia. It's a pleasure to be with you today. It's maybe a little bit of background for your listeners as to, who I am and why they should listen to me. I got into this business of assessing homes and, offices probably 25 or more years ago now. And that was when the woman I was married to at that time became environmentally ill. She was allergic to the 20th century, so to speak, and I didn't know anything about that. I was working for a chemical company and thought that all these things were fine, and I found out the hard way that they weren't. And so her condition brought me to the Institute for Building Biology, which reflects a development of technology for assessing buildings and homes that came out of Germany back in the early days after World War II and migrated to the United States in 1986 with a German architect by the name of Helmut Zia, who is the founder of the U.S.-based Institute for Building Biology and Ecology. And I took training from them, and I discovered, lo and behold, that the home that I was in had chemical problems, high formaldehyde levels, and I found out that the system I'd put in to clean the air for my wife to help her with her environmental illness problems was actually throwing out huge magnetic and electric fields, and she was sitting in them all day long, and we learned that these things stress the body and they're not very good for healing.
Now, Larry,
Yes.
Can I interrupt you
Sure,
for a second?
Please, Sophia.
What year was this when you made this discovery?
1986.
Okay, so when you said just a minute or two ago, I thought everything was fine. Did you mean that you had no clue that the house you lived in had any problems?
I had no clue.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I had no clue, and we had to do testing to discover that it had high formaldehyde levels, and so that was an issue. There was something wrong with the plywood, and the plywood was emitting far more formaldehyde than it should have been for a much longer time than was reasonable. So, what?
You know what?
Yeah, go ahead.
May I mention something quickly?
Yes.
I had a leak in my house, I don't know, let's just say 5 years ago, from the bathroom pipe, and they had to gut a wall because it was upstairs and it had been dripping downstairs. And I'm telling you, Larry, when they opened up that wall, my house absolutely reeked of something terrible. I couldn't connect it with anything, and I got really sick. I got this terrible rash. I had this flu-y thing going on. I mean, I was housebound in a house that smelled, and I knew there was something coming out of the walls. So maybe that's exactly what it was.
Well, it would probably have been either bacteria or more likely mold. And when for your listeners, when you have a water invasion like that and the materials are wet, you can't just rip a wall open without containing the room. The idea would be to seal the room off from the rest of the house, put in the appropriate filtration equipment, and not let what comes out of the wall when they're tearing it apart get into the rest of the house. And so it sounds like maybe that didn't happen, and you were exposed to what was in the walls. And of course, when they're ripping it apart, they're disturbing all these molds, and they're putting the spores in the air, and you breathe them in, and depending on the kinds of molds, you could have what are called mycotoxins that travel with the spores and with the well, if you can think of mold spores like grow on miniature trees, and there's trunks and branches, and the leaves are mold spores, and when you tear a wall apart, you break all those things up into little pieces, and you inject them into the air, and then people breathe those in, and they can be, if they're already allergic, they'll react to them, or they could become sensitized to this because of a very high level of exposure when they weren't sensitized before. So in a mold remediation, it's nothing to fool around with, and you should never tear an area apart without containing it.
Well, honestly, it smelled of chemicals. It was some very weird, very strong chemical smell. So that's why I suggested that it might have been something like formaldehyde. Because I dimly remembered that smell from my past, and maybe it was, remember when we were in science class in 9th grade and we looked at bizarre things in jars? Those were all in formaldehyde.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, and it was something like that. I don't know. But anyway, I did sidetrack. I'm sorry, but I've given listeners a chance to hear how exact you really are.
And we might put a conclusion on that. Back when you were in high school, you could get formaldehyde in a jar. Now you need a permit to buy formaldehyde. It's such a potent sensitizer for allergies and implicated in some cancers that you can't buy it unless you have a special permit to do so. So, and yet it's still in some products, which is unfortunate. So we can move on, because I know we wanted to talk today about electromagnetic radiation, and we can do that.
Yeah, when I met you at this new home that was being moved into, Larry was actually remediating it, shielding it. The house was within view of mountain. I believe is it Black Mountain?
I do not know what the name of that is. Sorry.
Yeah, it may well be Black Mountain. But anyway, there is a mountain that is crowned with 3 gigantic cell towers. And I'm telling you something, Larry. I was driving home the other day, and I live a considerable distance from where we met that morning. And I actually saw from a hilltop that very mountain with the 3 cell towers. But anyway, because those cell towers emit absolutely horrendous radiation, of course they're saturating San Diego, this particular home was being shielded, and I got to see for the first time the black shielding paint that was being applied to the interior walls. And Larry was saying that another coat had to be put on because the walls are textured, so where you drag the roller over the texture, you get these little pinpricks of white still. And Larry kept insisting that these little white, tiny little spots had to be covered up because the microwave radiation could penetrate through those teeny pinprick spots and get inside the house. And I was also fascinated by the E-glass. Is that what it's called? The new glass that's thermally efficient?
Low E-glass is the terminology, yeah.
Okay, low E-glass. And that apparently also shields, which ordinary glass does not. So that was a new discovery for me. But anyway, Larry, tell us something about the shielding paint and how often you use it and what kind of people need it and that kind of thing.
Well, in my estimation, if you take a look at the Bioinitiative report, which can be found at bioinitiative.org, O-R-G, you will find that the recommended level of radiation for the general population is now, I think it's 30 to 60. The units that we're dealing with here are microwatts per square meter. There are many, many, many houses that have numbers that are quite high, much higher than that, over 100. And so it's my estimation that most or many people will need to shield their bedrooms so that they can be sleeping in a much lower level of this microwave radiation. And it's not just coming from cell phone towers, it's coming from the neighbors who've got cordless telephones, they've got, Wi-Fi setups going, which irradiate all the time. They have their own cell phones that are pulsing and downloading data, telling the cell tower where they are, and we have smart meters coming all around now, and all of this is just creating what if you could see it, it would be like blue smoke, clouding the air, and that's what we're faced with today. There's just so much of this radiation. It's unprecedented, and.
So this is why they call it electrosmog.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Now, Larry, when I was working actively with a local group here, the Bioinitiative report updated its guidelines.
Yeah, I was giving you the 2012. They were at 100 before, and they lowered it. The 2010 was at 100, and the 2012 they lowered it to this 30 to 60, I believe.
Actually, I've written it down, and it's been stuck on my computer ever since.
Oh,
so I want to just mention what it is.
Yes.
The regular population, not super sensitive, that's what that means. Their tolerance is 6 microwatts per meter squared. And the sensitive population, the recommended tolerance or guidelines for them is 3 microwatts per meter squared, which is half of the healthy population.
Well, thank you for updating me on that. So you can see, they developed these things based on the research papers they were reviewing, and they made sure that they were done well. And between 2010 and 2012, there were another several thousand research papers, and obviously the levels keep going down. Frankly, 3 microwatts per square meter is a difficult number to get to in most urban locations. I have that at my house, which I've shielded, and particularly in the bedroom. But you do, in order to get that, in most locales, you will have to do shielding. What I mean by that is you have to introduce something between the radiation source and you. That could be metal, like aluminum foil or sheet steel, or it could be this paint that Sofia was just mentioning, called Y-Shield, which is an acrylic latex paint that contains crystalline carbon, and the crystalline carbon acts like metal and reflects the RF. You noted that pinholes make a difference. If you can think of RF as like water, and if you have any kind of holes, then you've got water. The water typically gets in. So the more complete the shielding or painting job is, the more reduction you're going to get in the RF signal inside that particular room or inside the house if you decide to do the entire house. You have to be, you have to be careful when you're doing this because, many people like, well, maybe I'll paint one wall or 2 walls. If you haven't identified all the sources, and you block out some sources, and then you have others that are coming through unpainted walls, you could be amplifying them inside the space because they're now being reflected off the painted walls, back into the space. So you have to do measurements, and you have to identify the directions this is coming from so that you can paint appropriately. Of course, if you didn't do that and you were to, let's say, decide that you wanted to sleep as low as possible with these types of energies, then you would paint the walls and the ceilings. And if you were on the first floor with a concrete foundation, you wouldn't have to do anything more. But if you were on the second floor, then you would have to do something with the floor, most likely, to block the bouncing radiation from coming from the first floor, through the floor into the bedroom.
This is stuff I had never even considered, that you're going to have a bouncing effect inside, and that you have to also keep remeasuring and assessing, periodically in case cell towers have been plunked in other places if you don't shield your entire house.
That's right.
I wanted to mention something. The first bioinitiative report guidelines were set in 2007, and all those studies that you referred to that were done after that caused the guidelines to drop 1,000 times lower, the 2012 guidelines are, than the ones that they issued in 2007.
Yeah.
So people are taking this very, very seriously. And the federal government, I'd like to remind people, is using guidelines that are very outdated. And guess what? They come from studies paid for by the telecom industry.
Well, they were based, Sophia, on tissue heating, or the so-called microwave oven effect. And what they have found since that was set, I think it's in the 70s, is that there are far subtler issues with these radiations that affect you at a cell level. And it doesn't require heating to have that sort of thing happen. So you were mentioning 3 microwatts per square meter if you're sensitive, and 6 microwatts per square meter if you are just the normal non-sensitive population. The government protection limit is 10 million microwatts per square meter.
That's crazy.
Well, it is.
I mean,
it's crazy, and
millions and millions of times higher.
And they just went through a review because they were the FCC is the government agency that puts out these rules, and they were pressed into doing a review, as was Canada. And they came back, at least in Canada, I'm not quite sure whether the review was done in the U.S. They come back in Canada and said there's no research indicating that these levels should be changed, and Canada uses the 10 million number, which is total baloney. There's thousands and thousands of studies now that indicate that there's biologic effects from this that are below the level required for tissue heating. And the U.S. government and the FCC is basically not an arm's length relationship with the cell phone industry. The industry pays them a certain percent of cell phone revenues, and they're still paying off the bandwidth that they bought to use for running these signals around in the air. And they spent billions of dollars and bought it on the time payment plan. And so therefore the FCC has a conflict of interest, and so unfortunately we can't expect much from the government, in my opinion.
So who bought the bandwidth? The telecom industry?
The telecom, your telecom service suppliers bought the bandwidth, which is certain frequencies to use for their tower transmissions, and they paid a lot of money for that.
Mm-hmm. And also the other thing, Larry, as a layperson who was progressively educated about this, really due to my own curiosity, and then, of course, mounting sensitivity in my own body, because there will come a point when many more people will start developing symptoms and reactions to these transmissions. It all depends on your overall toxic load.
Well, that was exactly right. But I think your listeners should appreciate that in research that was done at Columbia Medical School, where they exposed human cells to electric fields, magnetic fields from the power system, the electricity that runs your lights and refrigerators and so forth, and from radio frequency, which are much higher energies that vibrate at a much higher rate. The cells reacted in the same way. They developed heat shock proteins, and the way it is explained by Martin Blank, who talked about that some number of years ago at a forum in San Francisco, that tells you that the cells are unhappy with their environment. They feel threatened and they don't like it. And so with that type of information coming out, even people who aren't feeling this, their body is not liking it. And so what we probably don't know at this point is that how various people display their dislike, or how the body displays their dislike for all of these energies.
Yeah, which may be subtle at some point and then less and less so. and then very overt eventually.
Well, I mean, what you see in these many, many studies, there are again and again it mentions immune system dysfunction. So it affects how your immune system is able to function because it's affecting every cell in your body, and the immune system is composed of various parts and pieces made up of cells, and they evidently are not performing like they need to, and so you have a weaker immune system, and that has really profound implications for people's, the entire population's long-term health. I mean, just think if we had another epidemic of the Spanish flu that happened back in the early 1900s, when we had many, many people die, and there was none of this type of radiation degrading people's immune systems then, what would we be faced with now? So
right.
It's a very sobering thought, and yet there's so much money in this business that the government and the people who run the businesses do not want to face up to the research.
Larry, I was going to say that in my waking up, it was made clear to me that one very significant difference between our world today and our world, 60, 70 years ago when radios were what we were enjoying and experiencing, is that we own and operate transmitters now. Earlier we were owning only the receivers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we were far away from the signal source.
Right.
But now the signal is on our body. Our phone is giving it out.
Exactly. Your phone is giving it out. Your Wi-Fi is giving it out. Your laptop computer, if you have connected wirelessly, your desktop computer, if you're not connected to the internet by a hard wire. So cordless telephones. I mean, Xbox 360. We got the new watch that you can wear on your wrist, which is connected by a wireless signal. So. Yeah, we're billions of times stronger in terms of the level of radiation that we're experiencing today.
Yeah, and the other thing that I just want to throw in is that a lot of people who wire their devices ultimately in the effort to protect themselves will forget that the devices now come with built-in Wi-Fi hunting. So you actually have to go into the settings of your computer and disable Wi-Fi. Otherwise, it's going to burp.
Exactly.
Every few seconds, looking for a Wi-Fi connection.
Exactly. So.
Yeah, I learned this the hard way, but it is very, very, very frightening in some ways. If you're a sensitive person, I mean, seriously, you're going to end up like sparrows. If you've ever watched sparrows, they hop around, they look over their shoulder, they hop a little more, they look over the other shoulder. And this is what we have to do now because it's everywhere.
That's right. We might also mention we've talked about wireless devices, and there are additional ones you need to be aware of. The new television, say they're sort of like a computer in a box for your TV, like Apple TV and Roku. Make these devices, and you hook them up to the TV, and you can get Netflix or that sort of thing. They have pulses that the unit gives off all the time, and they're not even if it's not being used, it's giving off these pulses, and in the vicinity of the TV, they're quite strong. And I've seen in some houses where they actually follow the wiring, and so they end up exposing other areas of the house away from the little device with these. You called them burps. I mean, they're pulses, and not good for us.
Right. Now, Larry, I am amazed by how many people have absolutely no clue. And the first injury that you see in their face when you tell them that their phone is hurting them and their Wi-Fi may be the reason that they're restless at night and not sleeping. It is so difficult for people to start comprehending this. And you had a personal experience with your wife. So there came a point when, it was not a mystery to you anymore as you started seeing all this add up. May I ask you what your background was before you did remediation?
Well, I'm, by training, I'm an electrical engineer.
Okay, great.
That's what my
So,
college degree is in that.
yeah, so it was in a field that, I mean, you were kind of tailor-made for this education, right?
Well, right. I mean, it obviously is easier if you have a background in the terminology and devices. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but other people who really, I mean, today, people's basic education is pretty abysmally bad.
Well,
They
there
don't,
is no education about how the technology that we use works. It's a mystery
well,
to
you're
most
right
people.
about that. Yeah.
I mean, and just as an aside, there is a course available through the building biology website that you mentioned earlier, buildingbiology.net, which talks about, well, it's primarily on cell phones, and it's been simplified to allow the layperson to understand, what these devices are and what they're doing and how they work. So that's one thing your listeners could do to educate themselves.
Okay.
There's also some units on just electromagnetic radiation of the type that we've been talking about earlier, which is the electric and magnetic fields from your power wiring in the house.
Okay. I will try to put links to those. But as far as you are concerned, I know people listening to this are going to start thinking, oh, well, especially the sensitive ones, we're going to have to do something in our house. You are operating out of Ventura, California, which is in Southern California, but do you do anything by long distance? Is there any way you can help people?
Well, I do phone consulting, and I work with people to help them to understand what's going on with their home and what they might do about it. Some of the clients I've had have actually gone out and gotten meters to measure. I mean, principally people are talking now about the radio frequency. I mean, that's the big 800-pound gorilla now that's affecting so many people. So they get meters and they're able to, we make measurements and talk about what's been found over the phone, and we talk about what might be done to reduce that situation. So, yes, I do work over the telephone.
Okay, that's good. Because, I know there are other people like you, and I had actually heard of you before, but I was very happy to finally meet you and see you working. That was wild. That was amazing. Measuring and, opening the window in that house, the walls being shielded. If people can imagine, the walls are all black, and of course they're going to be repainted with the color of choice for the homeowner. But the walls are currently all covered with this dark black paint that's very expensive. I think it's called Y Shield, you said?
It's called Y Shield. I mean, when you say very expensive, it's about 65 cents a square foot compared to if you were getting a no VOC wall paint at about 12 cents a square foot. So that's the relative cost difference.
Right. Well, I looked at the gallon price in some catalogs, and that seemed expensive to me. And then sometimes you need to do double coats. Then you have to buy regular paint to cover it with, primer and 2 coats of regular paint. So the endeavor becomes considerable for some people's pocketbooks. But nonetheless, this low E glass, we opened the window and Larry's meter went nuts, screaming, because the radiation from the cell towers was coming right through the open window. So then you close the window and the meter goes quiet because now the room is sealed again. So does this mean that when you shield a room and if you have the low E glass in it, you really can't even open the window?
Well, you can't. I mean, there are some things that you can do to take care of that, but most windows today have got like a half screen, and you could change the half screen to being. Step back 1 second. The screen today is fiberglass screen. It's not metal. It's a glass type material. It doesn't have any effect on RF. But if you go back to the aluminum screens, which are still available, you can have your frames redone with aluminum screen, and then you put that in the window. So when you open the window, the aluminum is working to block.
Well,
It's not quite
okay.
as good as low E glass, but it's in the 90 to 95% area.
So let me ask you, Larry, remember those pinholes you pointed out in the paint?
Mm-hmm.
If the radiation can get through the pinholes, the aluminum screen has a lot of holes in it. So
well,
what
it
happens?
does. That's the difference between being nearly 100% effective and being somewhat less.
So it would be quite a bit less.
Well, no, I mean screen in the frequencies of interest at 900 to like 1.8, 900 megahertz, which means million vibrations a second, 800 megahertz to 1.8 gigahertz, which is 1.8 billion vibrations per second. The window screen, works pretty well. I mean, if you want to open the window, then you have to do something, and if you're going to get air to come through, then it's got to have holes in it. So you're left with that choice, unfortunately.
Now let me ask you this. These are all hypotheticals. These are questions no one has answered for me. So you open the window, you want some airflow. Let's say you put a curtain of shielding fabric, and it's blowing around in the wind. Do these radio waves travel in an absolute, besides the fact that they oscillate, are they traveling in a straight line from the cell tower, or are they angled down?
They're traveling in a straight line until they hit a surface, and all materials do three things. They either reflect, absorb, or pass through the radiation. And so if you're having a shielding material, it mostly reflects the radiation. There's a little bit of absorption. And so basically, this is, if you think of ricocheting bullets, so you got these bullets and they're bouncing off of things, and they bounce all over the room, and if you have gaps in the fabric over the window, then they come through on the sides, and maybe if there's a hole between the drapes in the middle, then and they're blowing around from the wind, then you would be having waves coming into the room, and kind of on an irregular basis depending on the wind.
Right. So, but still, the fabric being another layer between you and the radio waves would interrupt to some extent. They
would. I mean, there's two types of fabrics. And one is like muslin, and the other one is once again, it looks like window screen, except it's white and it has metal wires inside of it, and the polyester thread is actually wound over the wires, and then it's woven into this mesh. So the other thing that I think your listeners need to appreciate is that these protective materials have they reduce the radiation, let's say 99% or 99.5%, leaving, in this particular example, 0.5% or 0.5%. Well, if you have a pretty low level of radiation outside, let's say we have 50, microwatts per square meter, and we had 1% left, it would be 5. If we had only 0.5% left, it would be 2.5. That would be kind of the goal we're looking at, right? And so It really, what you have to do depends on how strong it is. If you're near a cell phone tower and you have, if you're near or across the street from a cell phone tower, depending on its height, you might have 20,000 microwatts outside the house. Well, now the shielding problem is much more stringent, and you might need to paint the walls and paint the window frames, because by the way, those are wood or they're plastic and they're transparent just like glass. You might have to paint the window frames, and you might have to paint the entry doors that go to the bathroom if you have a bathroom off the room, and the entry door to the bedroom. And then if you're not low enough at that point, you might have to add what's called a radio frequency tent, which is a fabric that's sort of like screening in terms of the holes it has, and you put that over the bed, and then that's another 95%. And at that point, you're probably low enough to be sleeping in an environment that's 3 or something like that. I'm tossing out numbers. So what you need to do depends on what the situation that you're in, and it's always different.
Now, Larry, can you give me an example of a substance that absorbs radiation?
Sure. Concrete.
Okay.
But concrete, the people probably think concrete's very protective. It's not that protective. It's absorbing maybe 20%. the rest passes through. There are some building structures, for instance, different ways of building that are not typically used. Durasol block is a building material that's composed of wood chips that are held together by a little bit of cement, and you stack them up, and then you put rods down the holes that are in the inside of the blocks, and you put concrete in there. And Durasol blocks they absorb a lot of the energy. Yeah.
How do you spell that? Durasol?
Durasol.
Oh, Durasol.
It's a building material that's been in use in Canada for 50 years. I mean, they build parking garages and things out of it, but it's suitable for houses. And I saw a report recently of a test on a house that was Durasol block, which was where the reduction was quite remarkable. Now, these walls are quite thick. They'll be 12 or 18 inches, so there's a lot of material to intercept the radio waves.
Yeah, I can imagine. I wanted to ask you, when you travel, Larry,
Mm-hmm.
what precautions do you take if you have to stay in a hotel or something like that? Do you actually, first of all, do you stay in such places? Question number 2 is, are you sensitive when you're out of your own house? Can you tell?
I can't sleep because I feel like I've had 15 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
If the radiation is too high, I carry with me two pieces of the fabric you were referring to. It's called Swiss Shield Daylight fabric, and these are 8 feet by 12 feet. And then I get my meter out and I check out the room, and then I get my little push pins out, and I get up and I put this stuff up on the walls to block the highest level of energy, so that I can get it down far enough to where I can sleep. It would still be typically higher than my home, but it's low enough that I'm not being disturbed as much when I'm trying to sleep. So yes, I do that because all hotels have got Wi-Fi every place now.
And, I know. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to tell one of my own little anecdotes. I had to give a talk at a conference, and just as you said, that first night, it was a Marriott in San Jose. Lovely, lovely place. But I could not sleep. I tossed and turned, kicked around. I thought it was the bed. And then I realized that it wasn't. It was actually the desk with the Wi-Fi coming out, that area. So what I ended up doing was I had to take my meter. I had found a spot in the room. It was that little hallway between the bathroom door of the hotel room and the closet. And it was just narrow enough for me to sleep in, and I threw all the bedding down there, and I slept beautifully. But I could not sleep in the bed.
Well, it's unusual to have the Wi-Fi transmitter in the room anymore. They typically are in the hallway, and most of these hotels have drop ceilings in them, so they're actually above the ceiling in the hallway, and there could be, depending on the length of the hall, there could be, 3 or 4 of them on a floor. And if you end up in a room, right next to this thing, well, then you have the very strongest signal you could get. So it's very difficult. You can't really do anything if you don't have a piece of equipment to measure what's going on, because you can't really, you can't
tell.
You can't
right.
tell. Some people are sensitive enough; they can tell when they get, whether the room is good or not good. But for most of us, you can't tell. And we ought to be, grateful that we can't tell, because, you don't want to get sensitized, because it's a very difficult, painful, and a lot of people are suffering because of these radiations, the wanton use of these radiations, despite the research saying that there's a significant problem.
But Larry, when you say sensitized, you mean become sensitive to, right?
That's right. They were normal, and then it's just like chemical allergies. They were normal, and then they had an initial sensitizing event, which was an excess exposure to the allergen. In this particular case, we're talking about radio waves, and then their body rebelled, and then they became very sensitive, and they weren't that way before.
Okay, but when you said that you don't want to know where the radiation is coming from.
No, that's what I said. I didn't mean that. You need to know where it's coming from if you're going to take any steps to reduce it.
Right. Yeah, well, just so I can, I'll do chapter 2 of my little anecdote. The following year, I had to give a talk, or I had to attend the same conference. And I don't think I gave a talk that year. But regardless, this time I brought a big old sheet of my shielding material. And I threw it over the desk. And I had no trouble sleeping.
Sure, absolutely.
Because I knew, that radiation is coming from that desk area. But as you say, if it's now in the hall, I mean, I don't know what people can do. I don't even want to stay in these hotels anymore because I have exactly that same feeling. I feel like I've had all kinds of coffee late at night and you just can't rest. These are body-shattering harmonics. They agitate the cells. They throw everything into confusion and they literally stop repair processes from happening. And I cannot say enough times, the reason you need to sleep at night or at all is because that's when your body goes into very deep restoration and repair modes. And they're so serious that you absolutely have to lie still and you can't move. And if you don't allow yourself proper rest, then as the years go by, you just start falling behind on this systemic cellular level. Your cells end up losing energy. It's called oxidative stress. They lose too much energy and they do not get enough in. And when you've hit that redox imbalance, reduction oxidation imbalance in your body, you have to do something about it or you're going to end up with some kind of illness or collapse.
So and on top of all that, we know that our bodies are designed to repair DNA breaks, and I think it's of the double chain DNA breaks which occur from natural radiation, which we have, and the body has developed an ability to handle that. This RF radiation causes single-strand breaks, or it could be the other way around, double-strand breaks, but not something that the body's not used to dealing with. And so you're basically injuring your DNA by being exposed to these things, and of course the injury gets larger and larger as the energy level of these cells go up. Of the RF energy goes up, then you have more and more of this kind of damage, and the body is not able to repair it.
Right. I actually did a post on my blog yesterday about this. The first study was back in August 2000. It was a very important, groundbreaking study, Berwick and Venice, Journal of the National Cancer Institute. This is when they found that micronuclei in the cells appear when DNA repair is not taking place properly.
Right.
Double-strand DNA breaks require proper repairs. If your DNA grafts back together with errors, with mistakes, that's called mutation. And if you have multiple little nucleuses in your cell, that's micronuclei, that means your cell has been injured and now it's creating these baby little nuclei to try to go back to normal. And micronuclei are, from this point in 2000, they were considered the diagnostic marker for elevated risk of cancer.
Yeah. Well, they take that a step further. Micronuclei in a cell makes the cell machinery not operate correctly, and the cell will kill itself. It's called apoptosis.
And that's the healthy signal for regulated cell death.
Right. Yeah. And then the micronuclei are dumped into the interstitial spaces that are filled with fluid, and it's these micronuclei floating around in the interstitial space there that, as I understand it, are cancer development sites.
Well,
and so this is going on all the time, Sophia, in everybody's body. This is the the frightening part. And if you're not, even if you're not feeling it, this is happening because we're all built the same way. And so
yeah. Now, chapter 2 of that initial fact that I brought out about the August 2000 study in the micronuclei is that, number one, people have to remember that cells can only repair broken DNA a few times. And after that, they just can't do it anymore. The DNA has broken too many times, and it's going to repair with errors, the mutations, and that means that's the red flag for cancer. So the study by Lai and Singh, this was reported in George Carlo's book, remember, Cell Phone Hazards in the Wireless Age? That book was written in the 90s. And the 1994 study, and then it was repeated by Tice and Hook in 1998 and 1999, they found that a mere 24 hours of exposure to cell phone radiation creates these micronuclei in the red blood cells. And what I learned, Larry, just a few days ago from my study of the lymphatic system, it was just an impromptu digging around that I was doing, those interstitial areas where the micronuclei are dumped, that's actually called excess blood protein, and the lymph fluid has to pull that out and take it away. It's part of the detox of the lymph. But when all your red blood cells are sticking together, as they do when you are in, viscous blood, thick blood, when you're in this kind of biological stress from radiation and electrical fields and so forth, when your red blood cells are stuck together, there's no room for the lymph to go in between them and pull all this stuff out. So you don't want sticky blood. You want red blood cells that repel one another, that flow, right? You want watery fluid.
Yeah, very interesting. You see there that this clumping is caused by the fact that the cells lose their ability to navigate and stay away from each other in your bloodstream. This is the effect of the RF on the cell. It is not functioning correctly because it's in the RF. Now, I guess this is reversible, right? If you get out of the radiation, then it's reversible, which is why we keep, George Carlo in particular is saying the time we have where we are healing is the 8 hours we're sleeping, and we ought to be in an environment that has low radio frequency fields, low electric fields from the wiring, and low magnetic fields from the wiring. And that's our one chance to let our cells relax, and we hope that it's enough to keep us well over the long term.
Right. And now, Larry, we could get into things like your blankets, thank you. If you're going to sleep on toxic polyester blankets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of that off gases. And
there's a couple of things. It may off gas, but it also is unnatural. It's an unnatural fiber, and it develops a unnatural charge, and your body's right next to that, and it's upsetting to the body. If you're sleeping with a blanket under your nose, which is synthetic, you're pulling negative ions into your breathing system. It's upsetting to the sinus passages in the airways compared to normal air. So that's the problem with synthetics.
Now, why do you say that it develops a charge? Can you explain that?
Yes, I can, because the normal movement of a synthetic fabric will leave charges on the surface of the fabric, and then as you have air move over the surface of the fabric, these charges that are, they're electrons, they're mating with the ion, the gas ions in the air. Ions are charged gas particles in the air, and if I recall this correctly, is about 3 to 5,000 charged gas particles per cubic meter of air, maybe centimeter, but so there's a large quantity, and those are like 60% negative and 40% positive. So when this air moves over a charged synthetic surface like this, you're discharging the negative ions, and you're left with positive ions, and we don't react very well to positive ions. And if you're familiar with the Santa Ana winds or the Frohn in Europe and Germany, when those winds blow, they blow high amounts of positive air ions and there's a lack of negative air ions, and it causes depression, feelings of ill ease. Here in California, the number of police calls goes up. Marital disputes go up because people are feeling so out of sorts and so irritable from this. So this air ionization is an extraordinarily important factor, and we don't appreciate that. So people who are really sensitive to air ionization can be totally debilitated during Santa Ana's or Mistral or the other areas of the world. Everybody's got winds like this, and they can't even function. I mean, they go to bed and they can't get up and go anywhere. So that's 25% of the population, and about 25% has no effect. And of the middle 50%, we get irritable, we don't feel well. So these are powerful things, and that's one demonstration where many people are able to feel the effect of the electrical environment. And it should give you pause about putting yourself into an environment which is totally unnatural, which is to say our current wireless environment, and just living in that, even though you don't feel anything. You should be greatly concerned that someday you will feel something, and it will be disastrous at that point.
Larry, when you were explaining about the negative charge on, for instance, a synthetic blanket,
yes.
Charge on, you had said that we would be breathing in negative ions, but I think you meant positive.
I did. I meant that it would discharge the negative ions in the air, the gas ions, and it would be positive. So right. That's irritating. Actually, that's irritating to the sinuses, Sophia, as well as this, this issue of mood.
Right, and I know that fleece blankets, if you flap them, they have static electricity. They give a little shock.
That's exactly right. I mean,
and then the same with carpet, right?
The same with carpet. Carpet's, unless it's wool, polyester or polyethylene, and it's another synthetic material. So yes, and it behaves unnaturally. And I'm comparing that to cotton and wool, where the charge that develops is the opposite of the plastic synthetics, and it bleeds off very rapidly. Whereas the synthetics hold the charge, which is why you get zapped when it's wintertime and it's drier.
Wow. Very interesting. And I have also noticed, as far as those Santa Anas go, that when you're on the beach, all that crashing water and that onshore wind, it's blowing from the ocean onto the shore, it's bringing negative ions. And that's why it's so refreshing.
Exactly right.
And revitalizing to go to the beach. But the days that the Santa Anas blow, and you're on the beach, first of all, you smell the smell of the land. I smell garbage. I smell exhaust. I smell like restaurants, and because the wind is blowing the other way.
Right.
And I didn't realize that it's bringing that positive ionized air, and that's what makes you feel because you're right, you do feel out of sorts during a Santa Ana.
Yeah. And as also, I mean, for me, my sinuses act up. I get postnasal drip terribly during that, and this is the irritation of your sinus passages, which is high positive air ionization. That's not normal.
Wow, that is very interesting. That's why because many people think that it's pollen and spores and things that the Santa Anas are carrying from the desert. But it's probably this radical shift in ionized air that's triggering your immune system, and it's in a wholesale way trying to make remediation in your body, because the immune system, the mucus membranes are part of it. Our body tries to rid itself through reflexive and other, coughing, sneezing, diarrhea, vomiting, mucus, tears. Then the filtration elements, the cilia, that's all part of immunity, really.
That's right. We're very complex beings, and developed over thousands and thousands of years in a specific environment, and we have decided that in the space of 10 years we're going to totally change the electrical environment. It's not a very smart thing to be doing.
Well, that's an understatement. It's very sad though, Larry, because people are the speed with which we are being technologized is so fast. And the speed
Right.
with which we're learning about the consequences is like going in the other direction practically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, but people, as we've been talking along here, people can see that the environment that they have in their house and in their sleeping areas is under their control, and in fact, the only person that is going to be responsible for protection is the person, the homeowner. Nobody else is going to do anything. And
Right,
it doesn't look like there's anything in the offing in terms of regulations or reductions, and so you're left to your own devices. And you may not understand this, but you need to do some educating so you do understand it and are able to protect yourself and your family.
Larry, do you have anything to say about children being not fully developed and thus more vulnerable to these kinds of situations, and then when their parents aren't even educated? That seems really tragic,
Yes, I mean, children are developing and their cells are dividing more rapidly, and if you're going to mess up intercellular communications and you're going to create these micronuclei, and you're going to end up with with new cells that are born when they divide, they're actually defective, permanently defective. I mean, it's a huge thing. And then putting Wi-Fi in schools is absolutely, I mean, it's insane. I mean, it affects the children's ability to learn. That's already been shown. Not to mention the fact that they're affecting their health. And if you just picture a classroom with 20 students and 20 laptop computers, and each one of those computers is radiating RF in order to communicate with the internet, and all these students are in close proximity to one another, and they're being exposed to very high levels of RF, the so-called power density, the microwatts per square meter. It's just absolutely insane, and there's a headlong rush to make sure that this all gets installed in your school, because the officials feel like if they don't provide this, then they're going to technologically hobble the students. So they've got to have
right.
it.
And fall behind other countries. And Obama said in February of, I think it was last year, if we have free Wi-Fi with our coffee, we absolutely must have it at our schools,
Right.
But so I had another question, which is as you know, this is in some instances unavoidable. You're going to get two people who live in a house, a husband and wife. One of them is sensitive, the other one is not, and poo-poos this whole idea of remediating.
Yeah.
So have you dealt with situations like that? And just tell me where you have been in that kind of instance.
Well, it's a problem. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, that Mark Twain said most famously, the most difficult thing in the world to do is to try to convince a man that something is true if his livelihood depends on it not being true. Mm-hmm. And then when we also bring into this equation the idea of addiction, that these devices are addicting, and people who have them can't stop using them because of that addiction. I mean, we already have centers set up in the country that treat addiction to digital devices. So it's a real issue, and and as with alcohol or drug addiction, it's very difficult to deal with, and I don't know what guidance I can offer to people. I mean, it's the same approach that you would do with other addictive substances. This is an addictive device.
Well, you're speaking of one person being addicted to the technology and therefore not being sympathetic to the person that they live with. I'm talking more about how not necessarily an addiction on the part of one person, but just a general dismissal that this is that serious.
Well, that's why I feel that the dismissal is due to addiction. You can deliver the bioinitiative report with 1,000 cited studies showing RF levels and the effects, and they still blow it off. So that's not the action of a rational person. It's an action. So I personally, I attribute it to the fact that they are addicted and they are, you know what people are like. They're constantly pulling their cell phone out of their pocket and looking at it to see if they've received whatever, a text or an email. It's just, and in places where cell phones are taken away, people, feel very badly when the cell phones are taken away. So, for some sort of function where you might be there where they don't want to be interrupted by cell phones, and they collect them, bag them, and collect them. So I don't know what the solution to this is.
Well, I have noticed, I've commented on radio shows about this, but it's happening more and more. You're at a red light, there's a car in front of you, and the light turns green and the car is not going anywhere.
Right.
It's because the person is texting.
Yes.
And the same thing happens at stop signs. People actually motion me to go. They're sitting at a stop sign, but they're too busy texting. This would be like a four-way stop.
Yeah.
And they want me to go first because they want to finish writing what they're writing or reading. And to me, that's unbelievable. Where you would put the importance of whatever is on your phone ahead of being a moving vehicle in traffic. So
yes, indeed. Well, I mean, that does speak to somebody who's addicted and that can't respond to rational behavior.
Now, Larry, I'd like to learn a little more about dust mites. We've heard of these. I've heard, is this the same as, how they tell you your mattress is full of these tiny little organisms that have been living there for years?
And your pillow, yeah.
And your pillow, yeah. So what can be done about that? Do you just have to throw stuff away and get new, or can you wash, or what?
Well, you do wash your bedding, and that's one way. You're removing the dust mites with hot water and soap. But if you're using a standard pillow casing and standard cover for your bed, then these things are they're microscopic, and what they create, which is basically their waste products or feces, is very small, and it actually sifts between the holes between the fibers and enters the inside of the pillow and the lower down in the mattress, and that becomes impossible to clean out. The allergy is not so much from the live dust mite. The allergy is from the feces and the desiccated parts of the dust mites, and you inhale them and react to the protein in their structures. And so there's material that's called barrier cloth, and there are places where you can buy barrier cloth mattress bags and barrier cloth pillow cases, and the dust mite materials can't get through those because they're so tightly woven. And so I guess at this point, if you don't have them, you throw your pillows out, get new ones. You get these casings, and you put the pillow in the casing, and then you don't get this issue with every time you fluff up your pillow, if you've got dust mites inside, you're blowing pieces dust mite pieces and waste. You're blowing it out into your face. So,
but when deep in your mattress, you can't wash that.
No, you can't. I don't know that there's any way. I mean, you could bag it, and then what's in there doesn't get out. So if you had a new mattress, you'd bag it, and then stuff wouldn't get in. But that it would have worked both ways.
Now, this dust mite issue, I know some people who think, it makes me laugh, that their insomnia is due to not having a new mattress. So they buy a new mattress every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all these different, sleep number and heated and all this stuff. So there's always something to buy for a lot of money.
Right.
And to improve your sleep quality, when in fact it could be their wireless router or their decked phone or something like that.
Or the wiring in their walls, because electric fields are a significant disturber of sleep.
Right.
The wiring in the walls causes these. You think of them like hairs coming off the wires, and they come out into space and they hit your body and they generate a a voltage on your body, which is vibrating at 60 times a second, and that's never existed before 1900. And we get sleep disturbances. You don't sleep soundly, heart palpitations, muscle cramping. Your allergy response is worse during the day. This has been just shown over and over again on a observational basis, as opposed to somebody doing a study on it. Time and time again, we can improve people's sleep quality and how they feel during the day by cleaning up their sleeping area. And now that includes radio frequencies as well as the energies from your wiring. That used to be the big thing 15, 20 years ago. I'm noting, Sophia, that we're moving on to 11:40, and I have an appointment in Santa Barbara with a client who actually is electrically sensitive, and she has been looking for a house to live in because she has to leave the one she's in now, and it's been quite a chore to find houses, rental houses, that are in areas with the radiation low enough that she could enjoy the backyard, or the patio.
So you're going to accompany her on her house?
Yeah, we're looking at four more potential residences today.
Wow. Okay. Well, if you need to go, that's fine. I have a couple more questions for you, but I would much rather you get to your appointment on time. So maybe we'll continue this because I can keep asking questions.
Well, I'd love to, and that maybe will be beneficial in, getting the word out to people.
I think so, because what you're doing is different from, experts on the subject itself. You are actually digging into ways to reconstruct your life so that these experiences don't take you down.
Right.
All right. Well, Larry, I would very much like you to get to your interview, with plenty of time to spare. And I thank you for this talk that we've had. And
Sophia, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for including me.
Oh yeah, and I really do want to have you back. So that will happen.
Okay.
Part 2. We're going to do a part 2.
Okay. Great. Yeah,
thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.